We are here today, Friday, for a conversation with Mr. Sumeer Bhasin. No, we are having problem with network. Ripudaman, please
So
stop.
should I mute my mic?
Yes.
I've muted.
So it is Friday, March 20th, and we have an episode of Strategically Speaking with with Dr. Adityanjee. Our distinguished guest today is Mr. Sumeer Bhasin, and we will be having a conversation with Mr. Bhasin on the Third Gulf War. It has become a very complex regional war. Mr. Bhasin is not a stranger to us. He has been on our platform before for various roundtable discussions. He's a geopolitical expert. He's an author. He's a thinker. He is also a businessman. For those of you who do not know him, he is director of at least 7 companies in India right now, and has been director of 4 other companies in India, and has business interests in Afghanistan besides in India. So we are very happy to host Mr. Bhasin again to get pearls of wisdom from him on as to what is going on in the Gulf region in the Third Gulf War. So let me formally welcome Mr. Bhasin. Welcome to our platform, Mr. Bhasin. Now you can unmute yourself. Kindly unmute yourself.
And it's a pleasure to be back on your platform. Although we are going through extremely worrying, turbulent times, which are causing, I don't want to use the word shock waves, but literally shock waves. It's not a localized conflict. It's a conflict which is impacting the whole globe. So no one is unaffected by this conflict.
Indeed, it is not a war between 2 nations or 3 nations. It has become a regional war in the Gulf area with global consequences. So there are multiple layers of complexities. And with the daily information coming, everyone knows what is happening, who attacked whom, how many drones were downed, how many gas fields were bombed, how many people were killed. We are not going to go into that. As an analyst, as a geopolitical expert, in this situation, how do you define victory for each of the parties and strategic objectives of each of the parties?
So it is becoming complex by the day. So, when the party is concerned who initiated this war, firstly, let's come to, just put a little background. As we know, Marco Rubio said that openly that Israel was going in first and we had no option, or whatever way he said it went in. So, which is very clear that it is Israel, and it is not, who's leading whom. So US and Israel have some convergence till some extent, but then Israel has two, because I'm laying the background of, when you're saying victory, is what is the end game? I will put it in that way. Victory is very difficult to define because the ball has moved on. So, so to put the perspective, for the US, it's a war of choice. For Iran and Israel, it has become a war of existence. And now the Arab countries, so-called Middle East countries, it's become an existential war for them also, because the theater has expanded. And as Iran had said right in the beginning, that if the US attacks us, since we can't attack the US, it is too far away. Our legitimate target, and they had declared it, our legitimate targets will be their bases and infrastructure in the Gulf. The second thing is when you're seeing in Ukraine war, the nature of warfare has changed now. Earlier, earlier we had a distinction between civilian targets and military targets. As you're seeing in Ukraine also, the same thing is playing out here. That there is no distinction between military and civilian targets, and unfortunately,
Let me intervene here.
yeah,
So you said nature of warfare has changed. No, I would disagree with that. If you look at First and Second World War, civilian targets were attacked, were targets, civilian populations were bombed. After World War II, there were a number of international covenants, Geneva, Code of Conduct for War, human rights covenants that barred actually bombing the civilian targets. But
right,
we have seen that in Madeleine's war in Yugoslavia, what happened? For
right.
78 days, former Republic of Yugoslavia's this thing, Serbia was bombed. So there's nothing new about it. We have seen this trend in the past. It is according to the convenience, what is the civilian target, what is the military target.
No, that's what I was coming to. There are rules, but then there are no real rules. And what I meant was, besides civilian targets, is critical infrastructure being attacked, and where it makes a structural shift. Now, as you know, this is a area where it's one of the key assets there is the energy, which is strategically a source of economy and wealth, and it has implications across the world because the energy supply chain and prices impact the whole world. So I think Iran, again, like I said, I'm coming to your original thing of victory. It is very difficult to define victory because this war, if I'm saying theoretically, when they went into the war, they estimated. I would put it differently. Yeah, they estimated, right or wrong, it's anybody's guess, but they underestimated the Iranian deterrence of continuing the war to this extent. Although they are day by day targeting and killing their leadership, but that will not is not, as we can see on the ground, changing anything on the ground. So now, victory is, they're all locked into that war, and the so there is it's very difficult to define victory because the scope for off ramps has become very narrow. And one more thing has become is, which I'm seeing, if you look at the Iranian, because Iranians are now, since they have survived this, they are taking maximalist position also, saying they are laying conditions. Look at their what I call the narrative war they build. There's a professor Marandi who comes usually on the English channels and says that I'm not. He says I'm independent, but Iran, I know nothing is independent. He can't speak without having the right this thing. So he's been part of the nuclear talks, etc. What he says, because who will guarantee if the asking your thing, if victory is another thing, but who will guarantee if there is peace? Who will negotiate? There is no guarantor. So now it is, they are saying we want the US completely out of the Middle East. Then the Arabs will say, we have, as it is, the US could not. We've seen that the US. See, the key thing was with the Arabs, which I wrote about earlier, is the US Arabs were depending on US security and protection from these drones and missiles, which we've seen what has happened, which has not been able to protect them. That cover has not been able to protect it. And because these are small kingdoms which do not have large armies, they have a lot of, but they don't have sustenance or armies on which they can, revolt. And now Turkey has been drawn in. So, the war is expanding, and there is no clarity. So it is going on by the day. We go back and forth with different talks. So it is very difficult. Ideally, the Americans would have thought victory, to coming back to victory, is they would have estimated Iran to capitulate, the word which is used, quickly and surrender, which has not happened. And you cannot win this war by air. You have to put troops on the ground. Another thing, when people are comparing this with the Iraq war and Afghanistan war, this is not similar to that because Iran is a very different ball game, unlike Iraq. So, where you had leadership, and you've seen that they have basically seen the Iraqi model, and they have actually war gamed this into, if the leadership collapses, how they continue to sustain, with 31 commands, continue to. So they have already built this into their structure. And I don't see them, unless, unfortunately, there is a major, nuclear, it escalates to a nuclear war, that anything in terms of victory, either side, anyone killing, getting to what is you define as victory.
So coming back to so-called victory or outcome or strategic goals, if we
Mm.
see United States, initially they had made some noise about, preventing the nuclear weapons proliferation, which everyone knows is a red herring, because last year when they bombed for 12 days, they said the nuclear program had been obliterated.
Yeah.
The other strategic objective of United States, as you said, was regime change, which was very clear. They would like the Ayatollah to go away, wish them away, and install a regime of their choice. And this has been done. It was done in Iraq, it was done in Afghanistan. Are they likely to be successful in regime change? And what are the options for them if the Islamic regime was to, you know, sort of
So,
disintegrate?
two things. So, they were so good. You mentioned Iraq and Afghanistan. You've seen Iraq, what it is. It's a fragmented, that whole, from Iraq to Syria to Egypt, not Egypt, but Egypt still has somewhat, to Libya. There is it has left a fragmented country. So there is no regime. What regime are we talking about? It's anyone's guess whether the previous dictatorial regime was better than this. We can have a debate on that. Afghanistan is a classic example where they ousted the Taliban, and after 19 years got the same Taliban back to, so they went full circle in a $3 trillion 19-year-old war. Now coming to Iran, see, this regime changes, they justified based on that internally people are being persecuted and women's rights are being, sort of suppressed, and oppression is there, minorities are, ethnic groups are being targeted and all. But they don't have a clear path. They use Pahlavi, Junior as a thing, who has never lived in the country, and his regime has no correlation with the people on the ground, the 90 million Iranians, that his regime was as dictatorial, and they don't have. And not to say of this channel, it's a serious channel, but I've recently, I don't know if you've seen it, because I have followed the narrative war on the social media. There is an American Iranian stand-up artist called Max Amini. Suddenly, I've seen him coming into debates. So he's a stand-up artist. Okay, so he's coming in the political sphere and occupying. This is that, giving that Western mode that these guys are bad, they are oppressive. So these are the values. But in terms of structures, in terms of actually governance and regime change, there has never been a clear path. Mr. Trump, with due respect, says people will rise. People will rise, and how will it happen? If you go back to Iraq, you gave that example. We learned from that lesson when they moved out the Baath Party, which was run by Saddam Hussein. Eventually, Petraeus and all they couldn't manage it, so they had to bring back that own Baath Party to get some semblance of order. So a state is getting securitized, and rights will, when they're at war and their children are getting killed, I see getting more securitized than leaving, and whatever difference there may be in the society, that sort of rather gets suppressed than can be used as, because that overthrow of the elite, I don't see a real pathway to that.
Well, in US, there is a lot of fascination for the decapitation of the leadership. And if you talk to statements by Pentagon generals and things like that, in every war, they talk about cutting the head of the snake.
Right.
So in this case, they did cut the head of the snake, but that snake actually regenerated another head. So what you were saying in Afghanistan in 19 years, replacing Taliban 1.0 with Taliban 2.0, here we have seen in less than 3 weeks, one Khamenei being replaced by another Khamenei. So does it look likely that there will be a regime change? that United States can use as a face-saving device and have an exit ramp, or they are stuck in forever?
So, so I see, firstly, as per military specialist, which is being said in media, we don't see without putting troops on the ground, you can influence regime change. And the people's movements are too disorganized, especially when they're at war. So how do they resist, because they are being bombed, you like it or not, what the Americans call collateral damage, which you also said that when the world wars, civilians were killed. We call it collateral damage, saying that they were not targeted like the school in the south of Iran. That so the point is, I don't see, even if they keep pushing, because two things. One thing which I said earlier, the Iranians, as is coming out, I'm quoting media, that one general in 2008 made this plan that if the, as you said, the head is cut off, how does the command and control structure continue to operate? Which they have 31 command centers continuing to operate in Iran, because they didn't know what to do. So the thing collapsed, right? And again, there, rightly so, they didn't do it just by an external, what I call a aerial bombardment. They had to eventually go on the ground. Now, in this case, I don't see, because that will, that solving anything immediately. Without doing that, I don't think they can, move towards a regime change with the construct. And also, to add, I have never been to Iraq, but just comparing Afghanistan to Iran, Iran is, although their women have certain, social barriers, but they are fully educated. Education is 90 some percent, so, and they're allowed to work. I'm just not, if you compare it to Afghanistan,
So, coming back to why
certain
this war
social.
was started, uh, apparently there has been some distancing between US position. You mentioned Marco Rubio, who said that Israel, started bombing initially, and United States joined later on because they were afraid that Iran will do X, Y, Z. And we have seen President
Right.
Trump also saying he was not aware of actually Israeli bombardment of the South Pars, gas field of Iran, and has said that I didn't know about it and I've told them not to bomb the Iranian oil infrastructure. So there seems to be some distancing between US and Israel. But coming to Israel's role, what are Israeli objectives, and do objectives of Israel as a nation state differ from the personal objectives of the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
very
that?
good point. So I see, the strategic security interest of Israel as a state is degrading the degrading Iran as a threat to them. Now, what are the threats? Is there possibility of having nuclear weapons, their projectiles, okay? The and last is their proxy network, okay? Netanyahu is not targeting just Iran. He needs a strategic reset for the whole region, and that translates into his political, image. So he is his. If you see, he is going beyond the state, because for the state of Israel, it is their target is Iran, and Netanyahu's target is basically, going further in making a bigger strategic reset in the whole region, not just targeting Iran, and then drawing his political legitimacy, his political goals out of that.
Let me bring another issue here. If you look at the left in Israel, leftist journalists, human rights workers, or leftists, even members of the Knesset. In fact, I was watching a video of a female member of Knesset being very open about, very stringent criticism of what is happening, bombing of the school, 165 girls, etc., etc., and basically accusing Israeli government of genocide of civilians. In 1700s, there was this British lexicographer, Dr. Samuel Johnson, who said patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. And Netanyahu has been battling corruption charges, and has been seeking adjournment of the legal process over the years. So we had a never-ending war in Gaza, a small strip of 10 miles by 20 miles since October 7th. I don't condone what Hamas did, but you could have dealt that war, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and it went on for 2 years plus, still continuing. And now we have another war. So is Netanyahu's political survival the game here rather than the strategic objectives of nation state of Israel? And if I may add, actually, in between this process, President Trump has been pestering the Israeli president to pardon Netanyahu unconditionally. So are we seeing the political survival of one individual leading to this escalation domination cycle in this third regional war in Gulf?
Okay, now we know the size of Israel. There are two parts to this. Okay, let's understand. We are very well aware whether Netanyahu or not Netanyahu, because it's a small population with a small land area, and they feel they have a threat perception or a threat of their neighborhood. They have, if you've seen their history in the past, they are built on this massive disproportionate response whenever they are hit. You've seen what happened with Lebanon when three Israeli soldiers were kidnapped or killed. If you remember, they went into and destroyed half of Lebanon, right? So in their security structure, disproportionate response is inbuilt, because it's the cost you give to the enemy. I'm not taking sides. I understand killing children is wrong, but in their security doctrine, disproportionate response is built in, right? Now it's sad because you are fighting in civilian populations. You say Hamas has underground networks, and they go and build their missiles in hospitals and all. So that becomes even more painful when you see civilians dying, right? But Netanyahu strategically, like I said earlier, is not so. Strategically, they are targeting Iran, but Netanyahu wants a total reset in the region. And I don't want to become controversial, but is going towards the greater Israel, moving this to a greater Israel, you know, as close to a greater Israel. Because if you look at it in the neighborhood, Syria is Syria is already run by so Syria is already unstable, right? You have an Al Shara, but it's like non-state actors. Like I told CNN, come on CNN, they have $10 million bounty or $5 million bounty, and suddenly they were in Italian suit and shortened their beards, and they are running a country for convenience. So every partner is looking at its own security and interests. So that fragmentation has started from Syria. We're seeing Iraq. There are pro and pro America and anti America forces already involved in this domain. So Netanyahu's thing is a reset, not only which actually has drawn in whether whoever did it, whether Iran did it or not, but drawn in the other Gulf countries. So for him, it's a reset in the whole neighborhood. If you see before this war, he even made certain things warning Turkey, right? So now you see Turkey has gone after this attack on the LNG facility in Ras Al Khaimah in which you mentioned, the Pars gas basin in Qatar. We had the Turkish foreign minister sitting there. I mean, standing there in a press conference with the Prime Minister of Qatar. So it is drawing on, and even Erdogan is making statements that the Shia Sunnis should be one. So, but there are but the fissure which have been created, which is already done, is between Iran and the Arabs. We've already gone past that. That goalpost. So, which
So,
helps.
if I'm not wrong, what you're saying is that Israel needs what is colloquially called strategic depth, wants to grab territory from the neighbors, and one of the stated goals for Netanyahu is greater Israel by land grab.
Yes. So certainly that not by land grab. That is one, greater Israel from the Euphrates to the Nile. But basically, this means get the degrade the security setup of Iran, so that the Arab states cannot say we have a threat from them. And if you look at declared or not, the only nuclear power on that side is Israel. Okay, the Arabs, none of them have, although they claim this, that the Saudis have, but into that. But then it gives him a free play because once Iran, that was the idea, he degrades Iran's, not regime change, degrades Iran's threat level as much as possible by targeting nuclear, the missile, and their proxies. Then he becomes much more powerful to run his writ in the region.
So coming back again to strategic objectives and end game, there's a lot of critique going on in United States currently, despite the gung-ho attitude of the current administration. You probably saw that the head of the counterterrorism task force, Joe Kent, resigned. And
Right,
his resignation letter, he openly castigated the administration for following or towing the Israeli line that this whole conflict was started by Israel. You saw the testimony of the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, on the floor of the, I guess, US Congress,
right,
where she submitted a written statement. She didn't read that particular portion, but the written statement says that Iran's nuclear capability had been obliterated and degraded in June 2025,
right,
and there were no attempts to sort of, re energize or restart the nuclear weapons program. There was
right,
no ground evidence of that. Uh,
right,
and also, she, put the ball in the court of Donald Trump, saying
right,
that it is Trump's decision that he felt that there was an imminent threat. So there's a very, very carefully choreographed dance sequence going on in which nobody wants to take responsibility. And it is now lying at the door of the US president. Nobody
right.
else wants to take that responsibility. So are we seeing a situation, or last 3 weeks or so, that one individual, the president of United States, has been manipulated in starting this war by another individual, that is Benjamin Netanyahu? Nobody else was involved.
It's not, I will reframe it. There was some convergence, but Trump's thing was to target nuclear to to show his primacy as the world's largest military, and but not to the extent Netanyahu's goal is bigger. See, like I said, Netanyahu wants a strategic reset of the whole region, right? Trump's was just to target, to submit, to come to some deal with the regime, whatever regime is left. So he didn't expect that they would draw in the Middle East and expand the theater. So the convergence was there, yes, to target Iran. He was not being manipulated to that, but the end game for Netanyahu is even further, which is not in US's interest. Because see, when their bases are getting targeted, now you see the Iranians what they're saying. They're saying if you want to negotiate peace, the first condition is all US's bases to be withdrawn from the region,
So,
right? Which works for Israel's benefit because a weakened area with lesser security cover, with their security facility, whatever means they have, makes them a more prevalent power in that region. With Iran, degraded, security degraded. So it is not completely manipulated. Part of it was part of Trump's or US's plan, but he's been led on further because there is an end game for Netanyahu. There is the difference is the end game. What is the question to ask is what is the end game of Netanyahu versus end game of POTUS or President Trump? Okay, so that's the divergence. Means the difference to be addressed.
So, one more factor here. President Trump said a couple of days ago that we were shocked that Iran will start attacking other targets in the Gulf area, other nations, etc., etc. We never thought that they will do, and you also echoed that. But actually, that is not factually correct. If you look at the interview by John Bolton, who was the former national security advisor of Mr. Trump in the first term, he has common record saying that, he had outlined this to Mr. Trump very clearly stated. And Iran has been, the Islamic regime has been saying this from the rooftop, from the megaphone, from the loudspeaker, from whatever media for years, that if the United States attacks Iran or its nuclear program, all American bases in the region would be legitimate target, and that is their war doctrine. So to say that we didn't know is either naive or an attempt at deception for persuading or assuaging the public opinion domestically?
No, I'll go a step further, and it's related to what you said about Tulsi Gabbard and Kent resigning. See, that's the professional intelligence briefing, the Director of National Intelligence. You are noticing Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner going into the region, who are, real estate or whatever tycoons, who have no idea about geopolitics or no idea about intelligence security. Now they have become his advisors. I was amazed that we didn't hear about it when all this was going on. Tulsi Gabbard is emerging now when they're stuck, but we didn't see her in any of the the decision making frames in the White House. Nowadays he does that, the press conference with leaders sitting. You never saw her in any frame. So he basically has bypassed, and frankly, if I may say so, an institution which is supposed to give him this input, which is a body which is supposed to do it, and went and listened to the advice of people who have no background or understanding about these matters. So because can you understand, his Secretary of State doesn't go, who's his envoy to Russia, to everyone, is what I know of is a real estate tycoon from New Jersey, right? So and his son-in-law. So they are carrying messages, and so their assessment, and due respect to them, you know, you if he's going on that, then God bless him.
Okay, okay. Let me bring another angle to this war. Although the Gulf states have asked Iran to stop attacking their, oil and gas infrastructure and American bases, and we have talked about this very openly that they knew that this will happen. There are unconfirmed reports that Mohammed bin Salman had been egging both United States and Israel to attack Iran privately while publicly portraying a neutral stance. What is your understanding of this?
So his is to develop a posture to constrain Iran, not to take it so far. You can understand his, if he and auxiliary to that is his, which was very clear because he was not sure, and I've written an article on that. Is because when Pakistan, which was very clear, because he was not sure of, US has become selective in its operations and its interests, right? So today, even the same Mohammed bin Salman is saying, if you have to choose, you have to protect Israel first or us first, who do you choose? So that is a no-brainer. Everyone knows that. So he's relies in an active theater. But his thing was to provide him security cover against Iran and constrain Iran, not to go out in an all-out, confrontation with Iran, right? And knowing, like you said, even they know what will be the implications. So it was just that as a deterrence, not a confrontation openly. If you notice, he did a pact with Pakistan, which also I wrote about.
SDMA.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense because it has it's just a, I don't know. And then we saw, and there's a difference which is now, right, for now, being put up sidelined, is between the UAE and Saudi. So, and Qatar has its own issues, right, which we've seen, their relationships are not too cordial either. See, the issue is, which is another report, is these guys who have come up, they've come up in a rich country. With money you cannot do protection. The more money you have, you're actually more insecure if you don't have your own protection seal, because you're dependent on other people to protect you. You know, because they are small kingdom with small populations, right? Who are used to a cushy lifestyle. And whereas Iran has been doing sanctions for 20 years, I've gone to Iran myself. I was part of our Prime Minister's track to team. I've seen PhDs serving as waiters there, right? But they're highly educated. They're people who have suffered. So they have gone to the minimum suffering, the maximum suffering in the people of last 20 years, whatever sanctions is the people of Iran, right? And they know who puts the sanctions. So, it is that asymmetry. He may now, I don't agree with you. He knew that how far it goes is to constrain Iran, to put that deterrence posture to constrain, not to go in an all-out confrontation like this.
So as we are going into escalation dominance cycle
Right,
and Iranian Islamic regime has hunkered down
right,
without folding the tent,
right,
they have no intention of stopping the attacks on US bases in the
right,
Gulf region, whichever country they are in, including Saudi Arabia.
right.
If Kingdom of Saudi Arabia were to invoke SDMA, which was very sort of projected as Article 5 of NATO, that attack on one country will be construed as an attack on another country. Do you see enlargement of this conflict to include Pakistan also?
So this is there is another theory going on. You were saying the confrontation of Afghan Pakistan. You saw recently Kabul. There were 400 people killed in a
Yes.
former base where there is
Yes.
a thing. So I know, and you've seen the visits of Asim Munir to Saudi.
Mm.
So there is a parliamentary debate. I think just before this started, or just after it started, the first second day of the Dhar, the foreign minister, on the floor of the Pakistani parliament, and he says that I am speaking to the Iranians. That if you attack Saudi, this is before they start attacking Saudi, we will have to come in. So they have a hotline to Iran. So he says there that Iranians said that okay, we need certain guarantees from the Saudi that they will not allow US to use their airspace and etc. Then we will spare Iran, Saudi Arabia. Now, one other thing has happened which you've seen, that initially Iranians, the initial attacks on Saudis, the Iranians denied those attacks. They've come on TV, they've come because they said we've not done it. Coming back to Pakistan's, they've got stuck now because they are next door to this thing. So I think they're trying to deflect and start a smaller skirmish with Afghanistan to say to Saudis that I'm sorry, we have this issue with the Afghans. So to basically they're stuck now because they can't there's no way they can start this thing. There's another thing in the case of Pakistan, whether in public domain or not, US still has access to their airspace, etc., when they want to, right? So they are on a very, very sharp edge, as far as this is concerned. I wrote this agreement didn't have any, significance, because I'll ask you another question. If it is reciprocal, then what will Saudi do if tomorrow India and Pakistan have a confrontation? So it doesn't work.
So let me bring you to another issue that you raised, that US has access to Pakistani airspace, and they have probably bases in Nur Khan, air base. They have
Right.
their assets there. Now, if because of continuous drone attacks and missile attacks, United States has to move its assets from that region, will they be using Pakistani territory to conduct operations against? I mean, they will use Diego Garcia, but will they use Pakistani territory to conduct operations against Iran?
No, then Pakistan gets drawn completely. No, this way or that way. And I doubt that Pakistan. I think they have enough resources. They have this amphibious marine ship with 2,500 soldiers coming in. I'm not a military expert, but if you apply logical sense, why is it coming in? So they are sort of considering a ground offensive, because what is currently going, if they don't get into trying, I'm not saying it'll be very difficult, but someone must have, against all advice, push that, because I would not advise that. And then we would say that, because if you remember, there were reports that the US special forces were trying to enter from the north, from the Kurdish area, okay, which for some reasons was failed or withdrawn or whatever. Now there's talk of them going in from the Baluch area, from the south of Afghanistan. So space is used. And Nur Khan, who will attack them? Iranians won't. I don't think they'll go and hit Nur Khan. So Nur Khan has no meaning, and I'm not going to say it, but after what happened in Operation Sindoor, I don't know the status of Nur Khan, what is left of it.
So, as we said, that it is a regional war, it is escalating, more and more countries are getting drawn into it, but its effects are global. It seems that in last 2.5 weeks, going into the fourth week on Saturday, is there any, not victor, but anyone who has got strategic advantage at this point in time in the international geopolitical arena, from your point of view?
So one country which is clearly gained is Russia, because that has put two advantages they've got: not only the rise in energy prices, but now it's putting pressure on the Europeans to consider, Russian gas or supplies, because they were already suffering from the effects of the Ukraine war, and now oil is probably doubled from where it was pre-Russia, and they're able to sell. I was reading interesting statistics because of that Trump, the effect of the penal tariffs, which in conditions Trump created for India, he's given India a 30-day reprieve to buy Russian gas, Russian oil. Now I heard another country is, I think it's South Korea, is considering buying Russian oil. Okay, so now that will disrupt, and Russia will be a major gainer, right? On this. So Russia gains. China is watching on the line. China suffers to some extent because of their vulnerabilities to the energy supply lines. Okay, and this war expanding, because if Pakistan comes in, as you said, in some form or manner, then their investments in Pakistan, CPEC, etc., will also suffer. So the major gainer will in all of this is Russia.
Russia is basically supplying know-how and technology to Iran, and it is very obvious they have been their partners. So has been China.
Right.
Iran is allowing actually oil tankers to move from Strait of Hormuz if they are destined
Right.
for certain countries, and they
Right.
have this doctrine of selective passage, that they are not going to allow tankers belonging to enemy countries, but will allow tankers give safe passage to tankers from friendly countries, and China is one of them. So Chinese have been getting the oil, although it was disrupted for some period of time.
Right.
But let me bring another angle. Those 2,500 Marines that are around Singapore, off Choke of Malacca, Strait of Malacca, and heading towards the Gulf region, where are they from?
From Japan. So
From Japan. The
right.
THAAD and Patriot missile batteries have been dismantled from South Korea,
Right.
and they are being brought again to the Gulf region. All the
Right.
Indo-Pacific resources, Indo-PACOM, they are moving towards the CENTCOM.
No, agreed. So, what you're saying is it weakens. So, to answer your question, immediate benefit is to Russia. China, because China is not, I don't think China is going to go into, because China, I'll reframe your question. If you think China will take an opportunity and, go beyond where it is, which is, I know what you're referring to is Taiwan. I don't think that is happening. It is like, I'll put it in a different way. China and Russia both benefit, because when Russia was, drawn into this war, whether they were the aggressor, which was called a proxy war, where Ukraine was the theater, and into depleting Russian resources, both economically and manpower, means loss of lives and resources, and they had to bring in soldiers from North Korea, right? It was a depleting war. Now, in that context, China has benefited because it is depleting U.S. Uh, military resources in a conflict zone, and weakening their posture. The word means in defense admin on the Indo-Pacific. But I don't. So they, it weakens the posture, but I don't see them, gaining, means it weakens it in the long term, but immediately I don't see them gaining anything out of it.
So they may not be gaining in territorial terms or those terms, but they are strategically gaining advantage. They are putting more and more pressure on Taiwan, breaching airspace of Taiwan, having their
Right,
ships, naval
right,
assets around Taiwan,
right,
creating a blockade-like situation. And
right.
also, they have offered Taiwan, quote unquote, mutual energy security if Taiwan were agreeable to peaceful reunification. That proposal has been sent to Taiwan.
Right, right.
What do you want to comment on that?
So I hear, I'm not a Taiwan expert. I hear the current regime there is more amenable to. So I don't see it's a pressure tactic, but the what I hear about is that the current regime is more amenable to come to some sort of compromise with China. So I think they can push that, but how far I don't know. and so it will not be it will not be hostile or kinetic. It will be something, if pressuring something to bring them closer on a, not immediately, but moving towards a an reintegration or whatever you call it.
You mentioned Russia gaining because the oil prices have gone up. The Brent crude is now around $108 per barrel. And Iran has publicly stated that their goal is actually to bring it to $200 per barrel.
Right.
If the war continues like that, is that likely to happen? Brent crude going up to $200 per barrel?
Yes, it very much can, very for the short term. So, but the point is that, again, like I said earlier, I don't see this developing into an Iraq or Afghanistan kind of situation. Uh, there, are, as you asked in your earlier comments, that there are very difficult off ramps because there is no structure. So the UN no longer exists. So what platforms will you create, and who will guarantee any agreement? There have been talks that India can. There has been the president of Finland visited here on social media here this, but I don't think we have the weight to because we have to hedge our bets between Israel and Iran. We have de-affiliated our policy, so I don't think we can become peacemaker beyond a point, except for appealing for peace. We don't have the leverage.
So
But
we are
and this
entering into an era of geopolitical fluidity and uncertainty, and a
right,
lot of unpredictability with chaos actually reigning.
right.
Uh, there is no rule-based order as of now.
Right.
And what we see is consolidation of strategic relationship between Russia and China as a result of this war in the
Sorry,
Gulf.
sorry, I don't call it strategic. Okay, sorry, it's a relationship of convenience. Strategically, they have more issues between themselves. It is just they're brought together by the sanctions and the financial issues and other things to this thing. But strategically, I don't see Russia. Uh, you saw that it's. I don't want to. This is a different discussion, but you saw the
I know what you are referring to, and I am very aware of that. So let's say their tactical relationship is getting
yes, that
consolidated.
I agree with.
Consolidated.
Relationship of convenience which they're pushed together with common problems or issues.
There was one sort of apprehension that because of Ukraine war, Russia was getting pressed or pressurized into becoming a junior partner of China. Now, the third Gulf War has changed that situation, that Russia is getting actually strategic advantage here and is becoming stronger
Right.
as compared to China in that whatever relationship, tactical or whatever. So we are looking to a totally different geopolitical scenario with multipolarity coming
Right.
and dollar losing its strength. Any
No,
comment?
so like you said earlier, now you come to the point. When you said who gained, so now you said Russia gained. That's why I said, if you look at it, what the multiplicity and the gains are, Russia is the number one who gained in both sense, on their dependence on China and also with the dollar price in their economic thing and the weakening of the coalition or the support for the Ukrainian war. Because they are facing serious questions in Europe. America is already, we know where it is on supporting the Ukraine war, right? And what was your last comment, sir?
Well, we are going into an era of multipolarity, not just geostrategically, but also geoeconomically, where de-dollarization being further strengthened because Iran is now refusing to sell oil in dollar terms. So, they are using any other currency to sell their oil.
That will go to an extent, sir. I'll tell you. See, right now you're saying with Trump targeting BRICS, right? And his conversations with Putin have been that allow the U.S. oil companies to come in. That is what they've been discussing to settle Ukraine and allow. And Trump is, what is his name? Exactly. So that's why I say they're not a strategic partner. Russia wants to get back into the game with Europe and get back into the dollar.
Hmm.
They don't want to get into this yuan, with the BRICS framework, so called. So BRICS 5 months is a loose alliance, but it will go nowhere because no one wants China as a hegemon, because then China becomes the largest partner.
Actually, I don't want to bring BRICS here. I was just saying weakening of dollar, because you are seeing actually trade getting on in regional currencies, not just yuan. It's Iran-China trade that is happening in yuan,
Right.
but the effect would be less proportion of international commerce being transacted in dollar terms.
But that will be, sir, it will not be overnight. It will be gradual. These things are happening. So there are percentages and all.
Yeah.
Even Saudi is dealing in yuan with the Chinese. Okay. So it's not only Iran, right? Iran is sanctioned, Saudi is. So that will be a gradual process, I agree, because as the world economic center shifts to Asia, right? But it will be very gradual. It is nothing is going to happen quickly because there is no consensus around. There are some talks about loose partnerships, but India, China, not. There are a lot of internal differences and issues and structures to be. It's a long way off there. Although I
In
agree with you that strategically or tactically, because China, Iran knows that pushing this will create, basically what they're doing, sir. I'll put it this way: they are basically, because Trump understands numbers. So when you use the dollar word and I will not trade, they're getting his attention. You know, so that is just messaging. It's even Iran knows how far it will go. It is just that because that is what he understands.
We are getting now almost into the fourth week. Do you envisage any exit ramp for United States, leave aside Israel, because their strategic objectives are different? And here, Mr. Trump has swallowed a hot potato, and he wants to, deal with that situation. So, what is the exit ramp for United States, and how long can United States, sustain this special military operation, because there's no war declared officially?
Yeah, that's the new whatever you may call it paradigm. Mr. Putin also calls it whatever operation. We called it Sindoor operation. So war has, the definition of war. I don't know what you use. So these exercises or operations, have blurred the definition of what conventionally was issued as, understood as war or exercise. See, sir, there is, so if you look at it structurally, Iran is not going to stop. Okay, moment who say he in whatever manner he says I did this, he can create a narrative and say I'm done, I'm moving out. Israel and Iran won't stop. Okay, what will be the end game between them to stop each other? Iran has said very clearly, and secondly, Iran is saying this. You can hear to their narratives. I'm not taking sides here, but logical discussions that their conditions of any off ramp are very very maximalist, saying US has to agree to removal of all their bases in the region, removal of sanctions, reparations for the war expenses. Now the Arabs can also say that you owe us, so that is a bone of contention on both sides, that you hit us, I hit you, so it's squared off. But they're coming with a maximalist approach, and then who is ensure that that works? So this area, if US withdraws now with a clear, which I don't see anything, it's a very complex, you know, inter, set of conditions where different, there is no clear structure or way out of this, because Iranians will not agree to a ceasefire. Okay, they will place, like I said, maximalist conditions on a ceasefire, which America will not agree. And now it becomes an existential war. If the US withdraws, then it becomes an existential war for Israel also.
So if US withdraws, it becomes an existential war for Israel. Will the Israel, or specifically Bibi, use what is colloquially dubbed as the Samson option?
That's what I'm saying. I said that we are leading this escalation will not. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but it is making the nuclear option more and more, you know, you know, uh, how should I put it, relevant or visible or whatever. which will have its own, consequences.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Bhasin, to know your insights into the region.
Thank you, sir.
War or war by any other name, special military operations, anti-terrorist actions, is an unfortunate thing. There are always collateral damage, attacks on
Right.
civilians, attack on infrastructure. We
Right.
have used over a period of time moral rhetoric to justify the actions of certain powers. But the hope is that this does not become a forever war. Although it's a complex regional war, the shock waves are being felt everywhere around the world.
Right.
So let's end this conversation with the hope that saner heads prevail and people start looking for exit ramps so that the conflict is not further escalated in escalation dominant nation cycle. Pleasure to have you, sir. Would love to have
My
you come back and
pleasure always.
talk to us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed.